Sarah Martinez adjusted her grip on the rifle, feeling the familiar weight settle against her shoulder. The morning sun cast long shadows across the shooting range at Fort Bragg, and she could already hear the whispered comments from the group of male soldiers gathered near the equipment shed. At 24, Sarah had heard it all before. The jokes about her petite 5'4" frame. The snickers about whether she could even carry a full combat load. The betting pools on how long she'd last in sniper training. She had grown up in rural Montana, where her father taught her to hunt elk in the rugged backcountry before she could properly tie her shoes. By age 12, she could consistently hit targets at 300 yards with her grandfather's old Winchester. By 16, she was out shooting followed veteran hunters at the local gun club. When she enlisted in the Army at 18, she thought her skills would be recognized immediately. She was wrong. The Army had different ideas about what made a good soldier. Size mattered. Strength mattered. And in the minds of many instructors and fellow soldiers, being a woman was an automatic disqualifier for the elite sniper program. Sarah had excelled in basic training, scoring expert on every weapons qualification. But when she requested sniper school, her platoon sergeant laughed out loud. "Martinez, you're a good shot for a girl, but sniping isn't about plinking cans off fence posts," Sergeant First Class Morrison had said, not bothering to look up from his paperwork. "It's about carrying 80 pounds of gear through hostile territory for days. It's about staying perfectly still in a hide site for 12 hours straight. It's about making shots that determine whether your fellow soldiers live or die. Maybe try for the motor pool instead." But Sarah was stubborn. It was a trait that had gotten her in trouble throughout her childhood, and it continued to create friction in the military. She submitted her application anyway, along with stellar marksmanship scores and a written recommendation from her civilian shooting instructor back home. The application was denied. She resubmitted it 6 months later with additional qualifications. Denied again. The unofficial feedback was always the same: too small, too young, too female. The sniper program was an old boys' club, and they weren't interested in changing that tradition anytime soon. Sarah watched as male soldiers with inferior shooting scores were accepted into the program, while her applications continued to gather dust on some administrator's desk. During this time, Sarah was assigned to a regular infantry unit, where her shooting skills, while acknowledged, were treated as a novelty rather than a serious asset. Her squad leader, Staff Sergeant Williams, would occasionally ask her to take difficult shots during training exercises, more for entertainment value than tactical necessity. When she consistently made shots that others missed, Williams would shake his head and mutter something about beginner's luck or favorable wind conditions. The real breaking point came during a joint training exercise with Special Operations Forces. Sarah's unit was tasked with providing perimeter security, while the Special Ops team conducted a simulated raid on a mock village. During the exercise, an enemy sniper position was identified on a ridgeline approximately 600 yards away. The shot was challenging due to wind conditions and the angle, but well within Sarah's capabilities. Captain Rodriguez, the exercise commander, called for the designated marksman from Bravo Company to take the shot. Specialist Jackson, a well-liked soldier with decent shooting skills, set up his position and missed 3 consecutive shots. The target remained active, theoretically picking off members of the Special Ops team below. Frustration mounted as Jackson continued to miss. Despite the spotting assistance from his team leader, Sarah approached Captain Rodriguez during a brief pause in the action. "Sir, request permission to engage the target," she said, maintaining proper military bearing despite her growing impatience. Rodriguez looked at her with barely concealed annoyance. "Martinez, Jackson has this under control. Return to your position. With respect, sir, Jackson has missed 6 shots now. I can make this shot." I said, "Return to your position, specialist." But the Special Operations Observer, a gruff master sergeant named Coleman, had been watching the exchange with interest. He had noticed Sarah's calm demeanor and confident posture, traits that reminded him of successful snipers he had worked with in the past. During a brief break in the exercise, he approached her quietly. "You think you can make that shot, soldier?" Coleman asked, his voice neutral, but his eyes sharp with assessment. "Yes, Master Sergeant." Wind is steady from the northwest at about 8 miles per hour. Target is stationary and well-defined. Range is approximately 620 yards. It's a makeable shot. Coleman studied her for a long moment. He had 30 years of experience in special operations and had learned to recognize talent regardless of its packaging. Something about Sarah's technical analysis and quiet confidence reminded him of the best snipers he had known. Against regulations and proper chain of command, he made a decision that would change everything. "Show me," he said simply. Sarah glanced nervously toward Captain Rodriguez, who was engaged in heated discussion with other exercise controllers about the continued delays. Coleman noticed her hesitation and nodded slightly, a wordless indication that he would handle any fallout. Sarah moved quickly to a shooting position, chambering around and adjusting her scope for the conditions she had mentally calculated. The shot was perfect. The target dropped immediately, and the exercise continued without further delay. Coleman said nothing at the time, but he made a mental note of Sarah's name and unit. More importantly, he began asking questions about her background and previous shooting experience. Over the following weeks, Coleman conducted his own informal investigation into Sarah Martinez. He reviewed her training records, spoke with her instructors, and even contacted the civilian shooting club in Montana where she had competed. What he discovered was a soldier with exceptional natural ability who had been systematically overlooked by an institutional bias that he found both frustrating and wasteful. The feedback from Montana was particularly revealing. The club president, a retired Marine sniper named Frank Torres, spoke glowingly of Sarah's potential. "That girl has something special," Torres told Coleman during a phone conversation. "Natural windage calculation, steady hands, and the kind of patience you can't teach. I've seen a lot of shooters come and go, but she's got the instincts of a natural-born sniper. Whoever's been keeping her out of advanced training is making a serious mistake." Coleman began documenting everything he learned about Sarah, building a comprehensive file that told a very different story than the official narrative of rejected applications and unsuitable qualifications. He noted her perfect attendance record, her consistently high physical fitness scores, and most importantly, her shooting performance under various conditions and stress levels. Meanwhile, Sarah continued her regular duties, unaware that her career was about to take a dramatic turn. She had largely given up hope of ever getting into sniper school, instead focusing on becoming the best regular infantry soldier she could be. She volunteered for additional training courses, maintained her equipment to perfectionist standards, and continued to outshoot her peers at every qualification opportunity. The jokes and dismissive comments from her fellow soldiers had evolved from outright mockery to grudging acknowledgement of her abilities, but the underlying attitude remained the same. She was seen as an anomaly rather than a serious operator. Even when she consistently outperformed larger, supposedly stronger soldiers in various tasks, the credit was attributed to luck, favorable conditions, or the relative ease of training versus real-world operations. This attitude was perfectly encapsulated during a particularly frustrating conversation with her team leader, Sergeant Peterson, following another flawless performance on the qualification range. Peterson had watched Sarah score perfect marks, while several of his male soldiers struggled with basic marksmanship fundamentals. "You know, Martinez, you're a decent shot for garrison duty," Peterson said while cleaning his own rifle. "But shooting paper targets is different from combat. When bullets are flying back at you and your gear weighs you down, all that precision goes out the window. The enemy doesn't stand still like those targets do." Sarah bit back her initial response, instead asking, "What would it take to prove that I could handle real-world conditions, Sergeant?" Peterson laughed, the same dismissive sound she had heard countless times before. "Short of shipping you off to a combat zone? There's no way to really know until you're tested for real. And, honestly, I'm not sure the Army wants to take that risk with someone your size." It was conversations like these that made Coleman's behind-the-scenes research feel even more urgent. He recognized that Sarah represented exactly the kind of wasted potential that special operations could not afford to overlook. In an era where precision shooting was becoming increasingly important in military operations, dismissing qualified candidates based on outdated assumptions was both strategically foolish and morally wrong. 3 months after the joint training exercise, Sarah found herself in an unexpected position. Her unit had been deployed to a forward operating base in a contested region where insurgent activity had been steadily increasing. The mountainous terrain and long sightlines made sniper threats a constant concern, but also created opportunities for precision counter-sniper operations. The deployment started typically enough for Sarah. She was assigned to regular patrol duties and checkpoint security. Her marksmanship skills relegated to backup status behind the unit's official designated marksman, Specialist Garcia. Garcia was competent but not exceptional, struggling with shots beyond 400 yards and showing nervousness under pressure that concerned his squad leaders. Everything changed during the 4th week of deployment, when Garcia was injured in an improvised explosive device attack. Nothing life-threatening, but severe enough to require medical evacuation and several weeks of recovery. Suddenly, Sarah found herself as the unit's primary precision shooter by default rather than design. Captain Rodriguez, the same officer who had dismissed her during training exercises, was now faced with a practical problem. His unit needed a designated marksman, and Sarah was the most qualified soldier available. His reluctance was obvious, but operational necessity outweighed personal bias. "Martinez, you're taking over Garcia's responsibilities temporarily," Rodriguez announced during the morning briefing. "I want to be clear that this is purely situational. Once Garcia returns or we get a replacement, you'll return to regular duties." Sarah nodded professionally. But internally she felt a surge of determination. This was her chance to prove herself under actual operational conditions, and she intended to make the most of it. Her first real test came within days of taking over the designated marksman role. Intelligence reports indicated that an insurgent sniper had been operating from a series of buildings in a nearby village, targeting coalition forces during routine patrols. The sniper was skilled and disciplined, taking single shots and then disappearing before counter-battery fire could be directed at his position. Sarah studied the intelligence reports with the thoroughness that had become her trademark. She analyzed the timing of attacks, the angles of incoming fire, and the ballistic evidence recovered from previous incidents. Using this information, she identified 3 probable hide sites that offered the insurgent sniper the necessary sightlines and escape routes. When the next patrol was scheduled through the area, Sarah positioned herself in overwatch with a clear view of all 3 potential sniper positions. She had been in position for nearly 6 hours when movement caught her attention in the 2nd-story window of a partially destroyed building. The range was substantial, nearly 700 yards, and environmental conditions were challenging due to shifting wind patterns in the mountain valley. Through her scope, Sarah could see a figure moving carefully in the shadows of the building. The target appeared briefly, disappeared, then reappeared in a different window. Sarah tracked the movement patiently, calculating wind speed and direction while accounting for the slight uphill angle of the shot. The insurgent sniper revealed himself for perhaps 3 seconds, just long enough to acquire a target from the approaching patrol. Sarah's shot was instantaneous and precise. The threat was eliminated before he could fire on friendly forces. The aftermath of this engagement was telling. While Sarah's shot had undoubtedly saved lives and eliminated a persistent threat, the reaction from her chain of command was mixed. Captain Rodriguez acknowledged her success but seemed almost disappointed that she had performed so well. Other soldiers in the unit began to look at her differently, with a combination of respect and unease that she found more isolating than the previous dismissive attitudes. Master Sergeant Coleman, who had remained in contact with various personnel at the forward operating base, received detailed reports of Sarah's performance. His informal file on her continued to grow, now supplemented with real-world operational successes that removed any doubt about her capabilities under combat conditions. Over the following weeks, Sarah's reputation as a shooter grew within the operational area. She successfully engaged targets at ranges that challenged even experienced snipers, consistently demonstrated superior fieldcraft and patience, and showed remarkable composure under fire. When other units in the area encountered precision shooting challenges, requests began coming in specifically for her support. One particularly notable incident occurred during a complex operation to clear a fortified compound, where insurgents had been manufacturing improvised explosive devices. The compound was situated on high ground with excellent fields of observation, making a conventional assault extremely costly in terms of casualties. Intelligence indicated that at least 2 enemy snipers were positioned to cover the approaches to the main building. The operation commander, a seasoned major named Harrison, had initially planned to use artillery and air support to neutralize the sniper threat. However, the proximity of civilian structures made this approach problematic due to collateral damage concerns. When Sarah's unit was attached to the operation, Harrison learned about her recent successes and decided to explore precision options. "I understand you have a soldier who's been having success with long-range engagements," Harrison told Captain Rodriguez during the planning phase. "I'd like to use her to eliminate the sniper threat before we move ground forces." Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Sir, Specialist Martinez is competent, but this is a complex operation. Perhaps we should request dedicated sniper support from a specialized unit." "Major, the timeline doesn't allow for additional assets," Harrison replied firmly. "I need to work with what I have available. If Martinez can make the shots, I want to use her." The operation began before dawn with Sarah positioned on a ridgeline that provided sightlines to both suspected sniper positions within the compound. The range to the first position was approximately 650 yards, while the second was nearly 800 yards. Both shots would be challenging due to the elevation differences and the need for absolute precision to avoid civilian casualties in nearby buildings. Sarah had studied the target area extensively through satellite imagery and reconnaissance reports. She knew the exact dimensions of the windows where the enemy snipers were likely to position themselves, the construction materials of the buildings, and the probable sightlines they would use to engage advancing friendly forces. The first enemy sniper revealed himself approximately 30 minutes after Sarah had been in position. She had been watching his probable location through her scope when a glint of reflected light betrayed his position. Sarah's shot was immediate and successful, eliminating the threat before he could engage the advancing ground forces. The second sniper proved more challenging. He was positioned deeper within the building structure and only exposed himself for brief moments while acquiring targets. Sarah waited patiently, tracking his movement pattern and timing his appearances. When he finally presented a clear target, the shot was at the extreme edge of her effective range under the current environmental conditions. The shot required every bit of Sarah's technical knowledge and natural ability. She accounted for wind speed and direction, temperature effects on bullet trajectory, the slightly downward angle of engagement, and the movement pattern of her target. When she finally pressed the trigger, the bullet traveled for nearly 2 seconds before finding its mark. Both enemy snipers had been eliminated without a single shot being fired at friendly forces. The ground assault proceeded without casualties, and the compound was successfully cleared. Major Harrison personally commended Sarah's performance in his after-action report, noting that her precision shooting had prevented what could have been a costly and complicated operation. However, instead of leading to recognition and advancement, Sarah's continued success seemed to create more resistance from within her own chain of command. Captain Rodriguez became increasingly uncomfortable with the attention his unit was receiving due to Sarah's capabilities. He worried that higher-level commanders would begin questioning why such talent had been overlooked for so long, potentially reflecting poorly on his leadership and decision-making. This discomfort manifested in subtle but significant ways. Sarah found herself excluded from planning sessions for operations where her skills would be most valuable. Requests for her support from other units were often declined or redirected without her knowledge. Most frustratingly, her recommendations for tactical improvements based on her field observations were dismissed or ignored entirely. The situation came to a head during a conversation between Rodriguez and his company commander, Lieutenant Colonel Morrison, who had been reviewing the operational reports from their area of operations. Morrison had noticed the unusual frequency and success rate of precision shooting engagements involving Sarah's unit and was asking pointed questions about their designated marksman program. "Captain, your unit has been remarkably effective in counter-sniper operations," Morrison observed during a routine visit to the forward operating base. "Tell me about this specialist Martinez. Her record shows consistent success in challenging engagements." Rodriguez felt trapped between honesty and self-preservation. "She's been adequate for our current operational requirements, sir, but I have concerns about her long-term effectiveness in a dedicated sniper role. These have been relatively straightforward engagements, under favorable conditions." Morrison frowned slightly, reviewing the operational reports in more detail. "Captain, Some of these shots were at ranges exceeding 700 yards, under challenging environmental conditions. That's hardly what I would call straightforward or favorable. What specific concerns do you have about her capabilities? The conversation was interrupted by an urgent radio call requesting immediate precision fire support for a unit in contact with enemy forces. An insurgent machine gun position had been identified in a building complex approximately 800 yards from friendly forces, but the position was too close to civilian structures for artillery or air support. Morrison made the decision immediately. Get Martinez up here. I want to observe this engagement personally. Within 20 minutes, Sarah was in position with Lieutenant Colonel Morrison, observing through his own binoculars. The target was challenging even by her standards. A machine gun position visible through a small window opening. With friendly forces in close proximity and civilian buildings in the background, the shot required absolute precision to neutralize the threat without risking collateral damage. Sarah took her time, carefully calculating all environmental factors and studying the target through her scope. The enemy machine gunner was partially concealed and moving periodically, making timing critical. She waited for nearly 15 minutes before the target presented a clear engagement opportunity. The shot was perfect. The machine gun fell silent immediately, and the friendly forces were able to advance without further resistance. Morrison watched the entire engagement through his binoculars, noting Sarah's methodical approach, patience under pressure, and absolute precision in execution. Following the successful engagement, Morrison pulled Captain Rodriguez aside for a private conversation that would have significant implications for Sarah's future. Though she remained unaware of the discussion at the time, Colonel James Mitchell arrived at the forward operating base on a routine inspection tour, but his visit would prove to be anything but routine for Sarah Martinez. Mitchell was a Navy SEAL with over 20 years of special operations experience, including multiple combat deployments where precision shooting had often meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. As part of his current assignment in joint operations planning, he was tasked with identifying and recruiting exceptional talent for specialized programs. Mitchell's reputation preceded him. Stories circulated throughout the base about his legendary shooting abilities, his role in several classified operations, and his uncanny ability to spot potential in soldiers that others had overlooked. He had personally trained some of the most successful snipers in recent military history, and his recommendations carried significant weight at the highest levels of command. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison had specifically requested a meeting with Mitchell to discuss operational capabilities and personnel development within his area of responsibility. During their private conversation, Morrison brought up Sarah's remarkable performance record, expressing his frustration with the disconnect between her obvious abilities and her lack of formal recognition or advancement opportunities. "Colonel, I have a soldier whose performance frankly defies explanation given her current status," Morrison began, sliding a thick file across the table. "Specialist Martinez has been operating as our designated marksman for several months, and her success rate is unlike anything I've seen in my career." Mitchell opened the file and began reading through the operational reports, range scores, and performance evaluations. His eyebrows raised incrementally as he reviewed engagement after engagement, where Sarah had successfully eliminated threats at ranges and under conditions that challenged even experienced snipers. What caught his attention wasn't just the success rate, but the technical precision and tactical understanding evident in each engagement. "These are impressive statistics," Mitchell said, continuing to read through the documentation. "What's her background? Where did she receive sniper training?" "That's the remarkable part, sir. She hasn't received formal sniper training. All of this performance is based on natural ability and self-developed techniques. She's been repeatedly denied admission to sniper school for various administrative reasons." Mitchell looked up from the file with obvious interest. "What kind of administrative reasons?" Morrison hesitated slightly before answering. "Physical standards, concerns, lack of experience, questions about suitability for the role, the standard objections that seem to apply more to her gender than her demonstrated capabilities." This information transformed Mitchell's interest into focused attention. Throughout his career, he had encountered numerous examples of institutional bias, preventing talented individuals from reaching their potential. However, he had rarely seen such a clear disconnect between demonstrated ability and official recognition. "I'd like to observe her performance personally," Mitchell stated. "Can you arrange a demonstration?" Morrison nodded immediately. "Absolutely, sir. There's actually a training exercise scheduled for tomorrow that would provide an excellent opportunity." The next morning, Sarah found herself at the range for what she had been told was a routine marksmanship assessment. She was unaware that Colonel Mitchell was observing from a concealed position, taking notes on every aspect of her preparation, execution, and follow-up procedures. Morrison had deliberately kept Mitchell's presence secret to ensure Sarah's performance wasn't affected by knowledge that a senior special operations officer was evaluating her. The exercise began with standard qualification targets at various ranges, progressing to more challenging scenarios that simulated real-world combat conditions. Sarah moved through each stage with the methodical precision that had become her trademark, consistently hitting targets that challenged even experienced shooters. Mitchell watched intently as Sarah adjusted for wind conditions, calculated range estimates, and adapted her shooting position for optimal stability. He noted her breathing control, trigger manipulation, and most importantly, her ability to remain calm and focused under artificially induced stress conditions. Everything he observed confirmed what the written reports had indicated. This was a natural shooter with instinctive understanding of advanced techniques. The most impressive demonstration came during the final phase of the exercise, which involved engaging multiple targets at varying ranges under time constraints, while receiving simulated indirect fire. Sarah moved through the course with fluid efficiency, engaging targets from 300 to 800 yards with remarkable consistency. Her final target, a silhouette at nearly 900 yards in challenging wind conditions, fell with a single shot that drew audible appreciation from the range safety officers. Following the exercise, Mitchell approached Morrison with a request that would change everything for Sarah. "Lieutenant Colonel, I want to conduct a comprehensive evaluation of Specialist Martinez. Based on what I've observed today and the documentation you've provided, she represents exactly the kind of talent that we're actively seeking for advanced programs." "What kind of evaluation, sir?" "I want to review her complete military record, interview her extensively about her background and techniques, and most importantly, I want to understand why someone with her obvious capabilities has been systematically excluded from advancement opportunities." Over the following week, Mitchell conducted the most thorough personnel evaluation of his career. He reviewed every document in Sarah's military file, spoke with her previous instructors and commanders, and conducted several lengthy interviews with Sarah herself about her shooting background, technical knowledge, and tactical understanding. The picture that emerged was both impressive and troubling. Sarah's natural abilities were extraordinary by any measure, comparable to or exceeding those of many successful snipers he had worked with throughout his career. Her technical knowledge was largely self-taught but remarkably sophisticated, indicating an intuitive understanding of ballistics, environmental factors, and precision shooting principles that typically required years of formal training to develop. However, the systematic exclusion she had experienced was equally remarkable for its consistency and apparent basis in bias, rather than legitimate professional concerns. Mitchell reviewed the rejection letters from her sniper school applications and found them filled with vague references to unsuitability and standard disclaimers that had no basis in her actual performance or demonstrated abilities. During his most extensive interview with Sarah, Mitchell probed deeply into her understanding of advanced shooting concepts, her mental approach to precision shooting, and her long-term career aspirations. Her responses revealed not only technical competence, but also the kind of strategic thinking and adaptability that made great snipers exceptional operators. "Specialist Martinez, walk me through your process for engaging a target at unknown range under variable wind conditions," Mitchell requested during their final interview session. Sarah's response was comprehensive and technically accurate, covering range estimation techniques, wind reading methods, holdover calculations, and target prioritization considerations. She spoke with quiet confidence about concepts that many formally trained snipers struggled to master, demonstrating understanding that came from practical application rather than memorized doctrine. "Where did you learn these techniques?" Mitchell asked. "Mostly trial and error, sir. I read everything I could find about long-range shooting, studied ballistics data, and practiced whenever I had range time available." The concepts make sense when you understand the physics involved. Mitchell leaned back in his chair, impressed by both her knowledge and her methodology. Have you ever considered that your approaches might differ from standard military doctrine? Sarah hesitated before answering. Yes, sir. Sometimes I use techniques that weren't covered in basic marksmanship training, but they work consistently, so I continued developing them. This conversation confirmed Mitchell's assessment that Sarah represented rare natural talent combined with self-directed learning ability that could be developed into exceptional capability with proper training and opportunities. More importantly, it reinforced his growing conviction that her exclusion from advancement represented a significant failure of the military personnel system. Armed with comprehensive documentation of Sarah's abilities and background, Mitchell prepared a detailed report that would fundamentally alter her career trajectory. However, before submitting his recommendations through official channels, he decided to address the situation more directly. Mitchell requested a meeting with all of Sarah's previous commanders who had been involved in rejecting her applications or limiting her advancement opportunities. The meeting was held at division headquarters with several senior officers present, including Captain Rodriguez, who had consistently downplayed Sarah's abilities despite her obvious success. Gentlemen, I've completed an extensive evaluation of Specialist Martinez, and I want to discuss some concerning discrepancies between her demonstrated capabilities and the official assessments in her file. Mitchell began, his tone professional but unmistakably serious. He proceeded to present a systematic comparison between Sarah's actual performance data and the justifications provided for excluding her from advanced training. The contrast was stark and difficult to explain through any legitimate professional criteria. Engagement ranges, accuracy percentages, and tactical effectiveness measures all painted a picture of exceptional ability that contradicted official characterizations. Colonel, with respect, garrison training performance doesn't necessarily translate to real-world effectiveness, Captain Rodriguez interjected, attempting to defend his previous assessments. Mitchell smiled coldly and opened another section of his file. Captain, I also have detailed reports from her recent deployment, including multiple successful engagements under combat conditions at ranges exceeding 700 yards. One particular engagement eliminated an enemy machine gun position at 800 yards, while friendly forces were in close proximity and civilian structures required precise fire control. Would you characterize that as garrison training conditions? The room fell silent as the senior officers absorbed the implications of Mitchell's presentation. The systematic nature of Sarah's exclusion, combined with her exceptional performance when given opportunities, created an uncomfortable picture of institutional bias that could no longer be ignored or explained away through alternative interpretations. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison, who had initially brought Sarah to Mitchell's attention, spoke up during the uncomfortable silence. Colonel Mitchell, what are your recommendations regarding Specialist Martinez? Mitchell's response was swift and decisive. Immediate enrollment in advanced sniper training, fast-tracked promotion to reflect her demonstrated capabilities, and formal recognition of her operational achievements. Furthermore, I'm recommending her for consideration in joint special operations programs where her skills can be properly utilized. The meeting concluded with Mitchell's recommendations being forwarded through appropriate channels, but the real impact was already evident in the changed attitudes of Sarah's chain of command. Officers who had previously dismissed her abilities now faced the uncomfortable reality that their assessments had been fundamentally wrong, witnessed and documented by one of the most respected operators in the special operations community. Within 2 weeks, Sarah received official notification of her acceptance into advanced sniper training with a start date that reflected unprecedented priority placement. The orders were signed by a general officer and included language specifically noting her exceptional operational performance and potential for specialized assignments. When Captain Rodriguez was required to inform Sarah of her new assignment, the conversation was brief and markedly different from their previous interactions. Gone were the dismissive comments and condescending explanations about realistic expectations. Instead, Rodriguez simply handed her the orders and offered congratulations on her selection for advanced training. Sarah's response was characteristically understated. "Thank you, sir. I'll make sure to represent the unit well." As Sarah prepared for her departure to sniper school, word of Colonel Mitchell's evaluation spread throughout the base. The soldiers who had previously mocked her abilities or questioned her potential now found themselves reconsidering their assumptions about talent, capability, and the importance of giving people genuine opportunities to prove themselves. Master Sergeant Coleman, who had been quietly supporting Sarah throughout her journey, approached her during her final week at the forward operating base. "Martinez, I want you to know that some of us always knew you had something special. Colonel Mitchell just made it official." Sarah nodded gratefully, understanding that Coleman's early recognition and support had played a crucial role in creating the opportunities that led to Mitchell's evaluation. "Thank you, Master Sergeant. Your confidence meant more than you know." The transformation in how others viewed Sarah was complete, but perhaps more importantly, the systematic barriers that had prevented her advancement had been officially recognized and dismantled. Future female soldiers with similar abilities would benefit from the precedent established by Mitchell's comprehensive documentation of institutional bias and its correction. Sarah Martinez had proven that exceptional ability would ultimately be recognized, but only when evaluated by people with the experience and integrity to assess performance objectively, rather than through the lens of preconceived assumptions about who could or should succeed in specialized roles. Her journey from dismissed applicant to recognized talent demonstrated both the resilience required to overcome systemic obstacles and the importance of having advocates willing to challenge unfair practices when they encountered them. Years later, Sarah would reflect on this period as the turning point where her career transformed from a series of frustrated attempts to gain recognition into a trajectory of continuous advancement and increasing responsibility in roles that fully utilized her exceptional abilities.